Last night's adventure of Jimmy Kimmel Live took her abominable about-face aback legendary actor Harrison Ford absolved off-set following an atomic confrontation with host Jimmy Kimmel over Hollywood politics and abolishability. The atmosphere in the flat acquainted different from the moment Harrison Ford walked onto the Jimmy Kimmel Alive set. The 81-year-old Hollywood fable accepted for his non-nonsense attitude and legendary roles as Han Solo and Indiana Jones carried himself with his accepted stoic demeanor, but there was article in his eyes that appropriate this wouldn't be just addition promotional appearance assault Kimmel aflame his trademark axle accustomed Ford to thunderous acclaim from the studio audience Harrison Ford everybody the man the allegory the fable Kimmel appear his voice accustomed that accustomed backward night host activity that had fabricated him a household name Ford acclimatized into the guest armchair with his characteristic understated attendance arms a polite nod to the admirers of four axis his attention to Kimmel the initial pleasantries went calmly enough discussion about Ford's latest activity a few animated anecdotes about working with assorted admiral and the obligatory belief about his famous onset injuries that had become allotment of his accessible persona but as the interview progressed Kimmel began counsel the conversation a joint area that would prove to be a minefield Harrison you've been in this business for over bristles decades you've seen Hollywood change badly what do you anticipate about how the industry handles controversial abstracts these canicule Ford's expression confused about imperceptibly his jaw abbreviating hardly what do you mean by that Jimmy Kimmel leaned back in his armchair his smile demography on a more calculated bend able-bodied we've apparent a lot of actors face after effects for things they've said or done some bodies alarm it. Accountability others alarm it cancel culture you've consistently been pretty outspoken about your political angle do you anytime anguish about adage the wrong thing the catechism abashed in the air for a moment too connected Ford's calmly comatose on the accoutrements of his armchair seemed to grip slightly tighter I anticipate bodies should be able to accurate their opinions without abhorrence of accepting their careers destroyed by a mob mentality he replied carefully Kimmel's eyebrows rose slightly. Analysis and befalling that's interesting so. You anticipate some of the people who faced after effects maybe didn't deserve it I beggarly we're talking about some appealing austere allegations in some cases I'm talking about the principle of the affair Ford said his voice advancement its characteristic growly accent but with an underlying tension there's a aberration between holding bodies answerable for genuine wrongdoing and antibacterial someone's livelihood because they bidding an unpopular assessment or fabricated a mistake. Years ago the flat admirers which had been periodically amusement at Kimmel's jokes throughout the black grew noticeably quieter some shifted uncomfortably in their seats analysis the conversation was demography an unexpected turn Kimmel apprenticed added his journalist instincts seemingly overriding his role as amateur but Harrison don't you anticipate that bodies in positions of access like actors and celebrities accept a albatross to be careful about what they say especially when it comes to acute capacity Ford's eyes narrowed hardly accurate according to whom you the Twitter mob some corporate boardroom his articulation remained controlled but there was animate beneath it now I've been in this business since before you were built and Jimmy I've seen trends appear and go and I've apparent good people destroyed by agitation I wouldn't call captivation bodies answerable for hate speech agitation Kimmel attempt to back his own tone adequate added. A secular back someone uses their belvedere to advance harmful ideologies or accomplish discriminatory comments shouldn't there be consequences the restriction in the flat was palpable now camera operators connected filming but several aggregation associates exchanged glances in the ascendancy allowance producers were adequate debating whether to cut to commercial Ford leaned advanced slightly his allegorical acuteness now fully focused on his host and who decides what constitutes abhorrence accent assault you the network Admiral some algorithm designed by 20-some programmers in Silicon Valley he paused absolution the question adhere or maybe it's absentatively by talk appearance hosts who anticipate their arbiters of moral ascendancy the comment hit like a concrete draft Kimmel's practice smile faltered for aloof a moment replaced by article harder I think best reasonable bodies can recognize abhorrence accent back they see it Harrison we're not talking about complex philosophical debates actuality we're talking about basal human decency basal animal appropriateness Ford repeated his articulation accustomed to accent that suggested he begin the byword inadequate that's a adequate byword isn't it broad abundant to beggarly whatever you wanted to beggarly the admirers was now completely bashful analysis they were witnessing article unprecedented this wasn't the accepted antic back and forth amid host and bedfellow this was something raw and complete and it was happening alive on civic television. Kimmel conceivably acumen he was losing control of the account attempted to regain his basement attending I anticipate we can all accede that racism sexism and bigotry are amiss back accessible abstracts promote those things they should face consequences that's not controversial that's aloof there you go a fresh Ford interrupted his articulation acid through Kimmel's words like a blade defining the agreement of the agitation to suit. Your anecdotal Kimmel's face flushed hardly his professional Composure Alpha to Abel. I'm not defining annihilation, Harrison. I'm just pointing out that there are consequences for adverse behavior. That's how society works. Association. Ford's Axel was dry and humorless, or is it how your particular corner of Hollywood works? Because after most I checked, association includes bodies who don't alive in Malibu mansions and don't get their Apple appearance from entertainment industry accumulation. Anticipate. The animadversion struck her assumption. Kimmel's smile disappeared entirely, replaced by about contained irritation. That's affluent, advancing from someone who's fabricated millions playing characters that gun bottom-ward bad guys without after effect. Maybe you're just upset because the complete Apple has more nuance than your movies. Ford's eyes flashed dangerously. Don't address me about nuance, Jimmy, and don't pretend that what you do actuality is annihilation added than performance art. Advised to accomplish your audience feel aloft to bodies they've never met. Achievement art. Kimmel's voice rose, hardly his accurate host persona. Bottom ward added, I'm aggravating to have honest conversations about real issues. Maybe that makes you uncomfortable because you've spent so long ambuscade abaft fabulous characters, though flat acquainted. Electric, now charged with absorption that had anybody on edge. Camera operators zoomed in, instinctively sensing they were capturing something historic in the admirers' bodies were pulling out phones. Admitting Aegis would later accroach the footage. Ford stood up, boring his 6-foot anatomy, casting a shadow beyond Kimmel's board, hiding behind characters. That's what you think I do. His articulation agitated, decades of gravitas, the aforementioned acuteness that had made him one of cinema's best compelling leading men. Let me acquaint you something about ambuscade, Jimmy. At Atomic, a Buckeye player appearance. I'm honest about it. I don't pretend to be article. I'm not. Kimmel remained built-in but leaned forward aggressively. What's that declared to mean at agency? You sit abaft that desk every night assuming to be some kind of moral ascendancy. Aback. Absolutely, you're just addition amateur, atrocious for applause. Ford replied, his words cutting through the flat blackout like glass. You booty circuitous issues and abate them to punchlines and acclaim break. You create capacity area that could be understanding. I actualize divisions. Kimmel's articulation absurd, hardly his composure, assuredly breaking. I'm not the one arresting bodies who advance abhorrence and discrimination. I'm not the one making excuses for bigotry. Ford's hands clenched at his abandon. There you go again. Anyone who disagrees with your worldview is automatically a bigot. Anyone who questions your methods is arresting hate. It's an accurate little ambush, isn't it? Shut down agitation by painting your opponents as monsters. The admirers was frozen, caught amid allure and discomfort. This wasn't entertainment anymore, it was a raw confrontation between two men. AP different philosophies about art, association and responsibility. Kimmel stood up, now analogous Ford's height as best he could. Maybe some opponents deserve to be corrective as monsters. Harrison maybe a back. Someone promotes account that aching bodies that dehumanize complete groups. They forfeit the appropriate to polite disagreement. And who fabricated you? Adjudicator and jury. Ford attempt to back dispatch afterpiece to the board. Aback. Did allocution appearance hosts become the arbiters of adequate anticipation? When did comedians alpha chief who gets to work and who gets blacklisted? We're not blacklisting anyone, Kimmel protested, but his articulation lacked conviction. We're aloof. Allotment not to platform abhorrence. Ford's Axel was articulate and bitter. Not platforming abhorrence, that's what you alarm it, but what you absolutely beggarly is not platforming anyone who doesn't agree with your political orthodoxy, anyone who questions the narrative, anyone who thinks for themselves. The confrontation had accomplished the agitation pitch. Both men were now continuing adverse each other beyond the board like adversaries in an old western showdown. The studio lights seemed harsher, somehow casting deep colligiosity that fabricated the arena look almost cinematic. Kimmel's face was red now, his careful media training alone. You know what, Harrison, maybe the problem isn't abolishability, maybe the problem is that bodies like you can't handle living in an Apple area. Your words have consequences area. You can't aloof say whatever you appetite after advance back. Ford's eyes narrowed to slits. Consequences, there's that chat again. Funny how After Effects alone assumed to flow in one administration. Isn't it funny how they only administer to bodies who footfall out of line from your accustomed cerebration? My approved cerebration. Kimmel's voice was about acute. Now I'm talking about basic animal rights, basal appropriateness. If you can't accept that, don't you dare lecture me about animal rights. Ford interrupted his articulation bottomward to a dangerous bark. I've lived through more history than you've apprehend about in your Twitter augment. I've apparent complete oppression, real abuse and complete after effects for speaking accuracy to ability. What you're doing isn't angry for animal rights, it's performative activism advised to make you feel important. The words hit Kimmel like a concrete bang. His face went from red to about amethyst, veins visible at his temples. Performative activism. I use my belvedere to alarm out hatred and bigotry. I accord voice to the blurred that's added than hiding behind cine rolls and blockage. Silent when it affairs. Ford's accord finally cracked. Absolutely blockage. Silent, staying bashful. His articulation boomed across the flat, causing several audience members to avoid. I've been fighting battles afore you alike knew what a television camera was, but I fought them in the complete Apple Not in some sanitized studio for acclaim. The flat was dead silent except for the hum of equipment and the about-oral whispers of panic producers in the ascendancy booth. Security cadre had confused, closer, unsure whether they were witnessing an interview gone amiss or article more serious. Kimmel conceivably analysis. He was losing the anecdotal action, played his Trump agenda. Oh, amuse additional me the war stories Harrison you anticipate because you flew planes and did your own stunts. That makes you some affectionate of ascendancy on moral adventuresomeness. You're aloof, another privileged Hollywood aristocratic who's upset that the apple doesn't bow bottomward to you anymore. The allegation abashed in the air like adulteration. Ford went absolutely still, his allegorical acuteness now focused like a laser axle on his host. Aback he spoke, his articulation was quiet but agitated, the weight of about independent fury. Privileged Hollywood elite, he repeated, boring as if tasting anniversary word. That's what you anticipate I am. That's how you abolish anyone who challenges your world appearance. Aloof characterization, them privileged and elite. And aback their opinions don't amount. Kimmel sensed weakness and pressed his advantage. If the shoe fits Harrison, you fabricated hundreds of millions of dollars assuming to be heroes while complete heroes accord with the consequences of abhorrence, accent and discrimination. Maybe it's time you acknowledged your advantage instead of defending the bodies who advance it. Fords calmly were abashed now, not with fear but with acerbity. You appetite to talk about advantage, let's allocution about the privilege of sitting abaft that desk every night. Casual acumen on people you've never met. Antibacterial careers with snarky comments and anxiously edited segments. Let's allocution about the privilege of never accepting to face real consequences for your accomplishments because you're on the appropriate ancillary of every issue I face. After effects every day. Kimmel shot aback, his articulation arise. I get death threats from your bodies. I get boycott and aggravation campaigns. Don't pretend like speaking out to join abhorrence doesn't come with a amount. My body's. Ford's voice was aphoretic. There it is, there's the real Jimmy Kimmel. Anybody who disagrees with you is allotment of some monolithic group, some adversary force that you're bravely angry to join. You can't conceive of the achievability that decent people ability accept altered perspectives than you. The battle had transcended television now. This was primal. Two alpha personalities, bound in intellectual action with decades of frustration and acerbity fueling the fire. Neither man was abatement bottomward and the flat acquainted like a crumb keg ready to explode. Kimmel's articulation became acute and desperate. Altered perspectives, is that what we're calling racism now? Different perspectives, is that what we're calling sexism and homophobia? Aloof altered agency of looking at the apple. Ford stepped around the board now, closing the distance between them. You accumulate application. Those words like talismans, like abracadabra, spells that automatically win arguments. But you know what, I'm not abashed of your labels anymore. I'm not abashed of your Twitter mob or your abolish campaigns. Maybe you should be. Kimmel replied, his voice bottomward to bout Ford's intensity. Maybe bodies who avert abhorrence should face consequences. Maybe the canicule of hiding behind acclaim and affluence are over. The threat was unmistakable. Ford's eyes blazed with an intensity that had already fabricated him one of Hollywood's best advantageous screen presences. Is that a blackmail, Jimmy? Are you aggressive me on national television? Kimmel accomplished he'd gone too far but couldn't aback bottomward now. I'm just adage that accomplishments have consequences, words have consequences. Maybe it's time you learned that. Ford laughed but there was no humor in it whatsoever. After effects from you, a man who's never done annihilation, added dangerous than a quaint jokes to a flat admirers. He paused, his articulation bottomward to a whisper that somehow agitated, added annoyance than shouting. You accept no abstraction, what real consequences attending? Like the flat was holding its aggregate animation. Cameras continued rolling but anybody knew they were witnessing article that would either be active always or become one of the best abominable moments in television history. Kimmel, perhaps sensing he was absolutely out of his depth, fabricated one final atrocious comedy. You know what, Harrison, I anticipate our audience deserves to apperceive what affectionate of being you really are, what affectionate of ethics you actually represent. Ford's smile was cold and predatory by all agency. Jimmy, acquaint them what affectionate of being I am. Kimmel's confidence wavered for a moment as he stared into Ford's barbarous boring, but his ego wouldn't let him retreat. Accomplished, I think your addition who's so insulated by abundance and acclaim that you've lost touch with absoluteness. I anticipate you're someone who defends bigotry because it doesn't affect you alone. I think you represent aggregate that's wrong with old Hollywood. The words echoed through the flat like gunshots. Ford stood apoplectic for several abnormal processing the attack when he assuredly battened. His articulation carried the quiet ascendancy of a man who had commanded account for bristles decades-old Hollywood. He again, boring. You mean the Hollywood that created art instead of advertising, the Hollywood that told stories instead of accustomed sermons, the Hollywood that admired its audience instead of lecturing them. Kimmel's aperture opened to acknowledge, but Ford wasn't accomplished. Let me acquaint you about old Hollywood, Jimmy. Old Hollywood gave bodies like you the belvedere. Your now application to abort it. Old Hollywood created the industry that fabricated you rich and acclaimed, and old Hollywood understood something that you've abandoned, that entertaining bodies is our advantage, not a right to indoctrinate them. The studio audience was absorbed watching a masterclass in controlled acerbity. Ford's voice never rose aloft conversational level, but every chat agitated the weight of complete confidence. You appetite to know what affectionate of being I am. Ford continued dispatch afterpiece until he was directly in advance of Kimmel's board. I'm someone who spent his complete career trying to be aces of the audience's trust. I'm addition who's risked his life dozens of times to accord bodies authentic entertainment. I'm addition who believes in alleviative bodies with address even when they disagree with me. Kimmel tried to arrest Harrison. I am not finished. Ford cut him off with surgical precision. You asked what affectionate of being I am, so I'm cogent. I'm the affectionate of person who doesn't charge to abort others to feel important. I'm the affectionate of person who can disagree with addition without calling them angry. I'm the affectionate of person who understands that complete backbone comes from architecture. Bodies up, not disturbing them down. The words landed like physical blows. Kimmel's face had gone from purple to anemic. His beforehand bravado completely evaporated. He looked around the flat badly as if seeking rescue. That wasn't advancing. Ford's voice dropped to about a loft of fizz, but somehow it abounding the complete amplitude. And you appetite to apperceive the complete difference between us. Jimmy aback. I'm done with this conversation. I'll go home and sleep peacefully. Alive, I've lived my life with candor. Can you say the aforementioned? The question abashed in the air like a sword over Kimmel's arch. The host opened his mouth several times but no words came out. His anxiously complete persona had been absolutely dismantled by a master artisan who accepted the power of accurate effect over manufactured abuse. Anticipation not, Ford said agilely, his point fabricated. He straightened his anorak with deliberate care, every movement accustomed dignity and ascendancy. You apperceive what, Jimmy? I came here tonight to advance a cine. Instead I've gotten a glimpse into the body of modern ball, and bluntly I don't like what I see. Ford angry joined the audience, his articulation accustomed calmly to the aback rose. Without amplification. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize that you had to attest and this you came actuality for ball, not a lecture on why a dress in this country has become so baneful. The accountability for that lies with bodies who abash celebrity with acumen. The admirers was completely silent, bugged by the raw authenticity of the moment. This wasn't scripted television, this was complete human drama. Advance in complete time. Ford turned back to Kimmel one final time. Assault. I hope anytime you accept the difference amid captivation, people accountable and antibacterial. Them I hope you apprentice that complete adventuresomeness isn't punching bottomward at bodies who can't fight back, it's accepting the backbone to admit when you're amiss. With that, Ford walked toward the avenue, his footsteps alveolate in the baleful quiet flat. Kimmel finally found his articulation, calling out desperately, Harrison, delay, we can assignment this out. Ford paused at the bend of the date, turning back with a attending of profound disappointment. No Jimmy, we can't, because working it out would crave you to listen, and you've abandoned how to do that. The allegorical amateur disappeared into the wings, abrogation abaft a stunned studio and a host who looked like he'd been hit by a Bale's alternation. Kimmel stood frozen abaft his board, his aperture opening and closing soundlessly as he processed what had aloof happened. The audience began to babble again, allocution again, fizz with excitement as the absoluteness of what they'd witnessed sank in. They had aloof apparent, one of Hollywood's best admired figures deliver a masterclass in address under fire while accompanying watching a talk appearance host's believability crumble in real time. Aegis assuredly confused to restore adjustment, but the accident was done within account. Corpuscle buzz footage would leak admitting confiscation efforts. Within hours the battle would be trending. Common oral canicule. Kimmel's ratings would collapse as admirers turned away from what abounding saw as mean-spirited activism, baited as entertainment. The adventure became a watershed moment, sparking nationwide conversations about the role of entertainers in political address and the aberration amid accountability and abolition. For Harrison Ford it represented a final absolute statement about the ethics that had guided his remarkable career. For Jimmy Kimmel it became an acrid assignment in the difference between wielding ability and earning respect. As the flat lights dimmed and the admirers filed out an animated discussion, one affair was clear, they had aloof witnessed television history and not the affectionate that would be celebrated in Hollywood circles.